Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. Today's podcast is recorded on location, talking with Lester Bowker from Cotley Farm in East Devon and Matt Greep, Agrii Area Business Manager for Fruit and Horticultural Agronomist. It's a busy time here at Cotley Farm, as amongst various enterprises, the farm grows and sells Christmas trees. Talking with grower and agronomist, we're going to explore the secret of success for this particular farm business. So thank you very much indeed for inviting us to your Christmas tree farm here in the heart of Devon at a timely time of year, because we're just coming up to approaching December, when I know you're going to be very, very busy. So tell us, Lester, about the story of how you started and why you started to grow Christmas trees.
Well, we started growing Christmas trees probably about 20 years ago, but the real impetus came when foot and mouth came to our main farming activities, and we wanted to diversify the business, and we were in outdoor pigs, and that hit us very hard, and we said we need to find some other enterprise so we're not solely dependent on one enterprise.
Right. And what other enterprises are you involved in right now?
Well, in the last 15 years we've taken on the family farm, which is dairying, cider orchards. We have some beef, a little bit of arable and some light industrial units. So quite a mixed bag really, but the Christmas business has grown and become an important part of that exercise.
And just to give us an impression of how many visitors come here each year, last year is a staggering number. Just share that with us.
Well, we know from our booking system that we see, the last 2 years we've seen about 5,500 cars come through in we're allowed to be open for 28 days, so in that period of leading up to Christmas from late November. So if you say there's roughly 3 people a car, there's 15,000 people come through in that short period. Obviously that includes children.
Yeah, absolutely. Children very, very important when it comes to Christmas, of course. Let's walk up through these trees here. I know Matt wants to come back to this one. He's seen something here. Matt, tell us, because you're involved in a lot of a wide range of crops. What's of interest to you here? What do you find interesting with the Christmas tree crop?
So I've been working with Lester and his family now for probably about 8 years. Predominantly started on the cider fruit that Lester grows for various cider makers around the UK, but more so over that period I've helped out with the agronomy aspect of growing these Christmas trees. For me, Christmas trees are an excellent crop for any farmer to have in the portfolio. They're fairly low maintenance. They can be quite straightforward in growing as long as we get the basics right. As you can see in this field that we've got here, one of the biggest challenges we have is the weed pressure that inevitably comes when you're trying to grow a field of trees. Once we do get those basics right, we get the foundations in place, the crop can get away quite quickly, and although it can take 5, 6, 7 years to get a marketable tree, if we can do that fairly uniformly across the field, the results can be great.
So, Lester, what does the customer, the discerning customer, when they come to look for a Christmas tree, what are they actually looking for?
Well, they're looking for shape primarily and colour. I always call it hairdressing for trees. We do a lot of pruning and management, but it's all about quality. And that's probably the difference between, say, milk production and Christmas trees. Here you're dealing with your customer really face to face, and if they don't like the tree, they walk away. So quality is everything, and quality control. So we're looking to get the shape right. That involves weed control in the early years, particularly so that there's no competition for the growing tree, and that's really the primary thing.
Really interesting the way you mentioned there that the customer can make that immediate decision whether they're going to buy or not. But you do a lot of other things here at Cotley Farm to attract the customer and deliver that experience, don't you?
Yes, and that's grown over the years. I think our big turning point was in 2008 when we brought reindeer onto the farm, and suddenly we saw a 25% increase in the number of people coming to the farm. And so that experience of coming to the farm and looking down our valley, customer wants to come on his own terms. That concrete's got to be washed and clean and tidy, but they come for that experience, and so they can see the piglets and they see the sheep, they see the reindeer, they can toast marshmallows, etc., that sort of thing, so that there's a real family experience there. And
Matt, that isn't the reason why you come along to this farm to do the agronomy, is it? Surely.
Not on this occasion, but I will be back with the family for sure.
Well, fantastic. Let's just walk up a bit. I'm really interested. So tell me a bit about this area of this growing area that we're in. Obviously, we've got different sized trees. Matt, what's the length of time before we have a marketable tree?
So we're currently walking through a crop of northern firs. These typically can be from 5 to 7 years to get them to the optimal height for sale, depending, of course, if that's going to be a 6-foot tree for someone's living room, a 4-foot potted plant. Christmas trees can be grown in different systems depending on the market you're aiming for. As the population is becoming more focused in the urban areas, houses are getting smaller, a lot of people are looking at smaller sized trees, moving away from a traditional cut 7-foot or 6-foot tree and into what we call a potted plant tree. But here where we are today, these will be grown for probably another 3 or 4 years until they're ready for Leicester to come through and cut and sell.
Yeah, and you talk about the different systems. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. So a traditional field-grown tree like we've got here, will prepare the ground, make sure it's the right pH, make sure we've got some soil structure there to get the trees away quickly. We'll grow that tree as uniform as we can with correct pruning, with fertiliser applications to keep the colour in the tree, and then we'll come through and cut that tree at the base, net it and sell it. That's a fairly traditional method of growing Christmas trees. In most recent years, people have moved towards growing a tree in a pot that's then placed in the ground to grow. We then lift the pot at the right height and sell it as a potted Christmas tree. There's a movement towards more sustainable Christmas tree growing, and a potted Christmas tree, in theory, can be put back into the ground to continue to grow. There's certainly a demand for that in the market. However, I think a cut Christmas tree is still the number one seller in the UK.
Right, and have you seen any specific trends in what customers are looking for over the last few years, whilst you've been growing and selling the trees, Lester?
I think it's still largely about convenience at Christmas. We do sell an increasing number of potted trees, but that finds its way largely to perhaps an older market or older people's market, people who want to give the impression of Christmas, put that potted Christmas tree. It's convenient and they can take it away, and they've done their bit for Christmas, whereas a 6 to 7 foot tree is a bit more difficult to manage. So yes, we've seen that element grow. As far as sustainability is concerned, I think we're all aware of that across agriculture, and we're going to see that grow as an increasing trend. We look at our fertiliser levels. We're in an NVZ area here, so we've got to make sure that's correct as well. And obviously we don't excessively use sprays, partly for cost, but partly because we want to make sure it's the right for the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, from your point of view as the grower, what are the challenges in growing the trees that as you see them?
The initial challenge is weed control and getting the plant established. We might need to, as Matt said, we need to get the fertiliser levels right and the pH levels correct. But those first 2 or 3 years, the trees don't grow very much, and it's making sure the thing's not swamped by weeds. And that's quite an intensive exercise.
We can see there's a lot of grassweed here. What's your approach to grassweed in an open crop like this?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The predominant weed through here is definitely annual meadow grass, but we do have a plethora of different weeds that come in because it is essentially a bare field until the trees predominate and block out the light. So in the earlier years, we do have a fairly blanket approach to weed control. We kind of don't want any weeds growing in the plantation, so that's mostly using our allowance of glyphosate where we can, and we have other actives and mode of action products available under the EMU for ornamental plant production. So we want to keep the weeds down as best we can. Christmas trees, of course, go dormant throughout the winter period. At the point where the buds are closed up and the trees are safe, we can go over the top of the crop. We don't have to just spray around the trees, around the base of the trees. So that gives us a bit more flexibility in what we can use and how we can use. And of course, it makes it a lot more cost effective as opposed to doing it by hand with a knapsack.
You can see that we use tramlines, rather like growing cereals, for that very reason. So I'm not concerned actually about the amount of weeds that are around here, because we know that we can come in late February, early March, while the trees are still dormant, and we'll come in with a low rate of Roundup, and that will give us our opening bare earth policy, if you like.
So it's a really important aspect here is understanding how this crop is growing and that dormant period clearly.
Yep, absolutely. And once the trees are growing and they start to flush, so you can see the new year's growth, they're incredibly sensitive because that tissue is very soft and it hasn't got a waxy cuticle. It can be scorched by glyphosate and herbicide very easily, even just by foliar feed. So we do need to be very careful around that growing period and timely with our applications.
To find out more about how Agrii can help you with your speciality crops or farm diversification, visit agrii.co.uk/contact or email info@agrii.co.uk.
Christmas trees can be susceptible to pest and disease. There are various diseases that come in on the needles on the tree, depending on the weather conditions. We're having more and more wet, prolonged winters. That in itself presents issues around rust and needle stem necrosis. So we have various pathogens that we need to be aware of, but the particular issue that I wanted to show you here, if I can find the tree, the particular issue I found here is we actually have, here we go, yeah, Lester's found it. So this aphid that you can see just growing up the leader here, which I think is giant fir aphid, is one of the main issues that we will have from an insect pest level. These guys will have a very strong proboscis where they can puncture into the stem and start to feed and take away the nutrition in the tree. It's going to grow unevenly. If we have aphid attack, we'll see a reduction in extension growth in that growing period. But more importantly, if we harvest this tree and take it into your living room, nature comes back to life and you'll have aphids crawling all over your carpet, which we really don't want.
What's the difference in terms of you connecting directly with the customer and selling direct to the customer as opposed to a customer, let's say, buying a Christmas tree from a supermarket? Because the customer's bought from you as the farmer. How different is that for them and that connection between you and them?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that when we're selling from a farm, I'm there, and so are the rest of the guys who work with me, and they've been trained, and I spend a lot of time just talking to customers. That's part of their experience. They want to come, it's hard to imagine, but they want to come and talk to me and my wife as we wander around the site and they learn about the Christmas trees. And I think that's really important because most people come, they don't actually know what they want, but you can guide them in the right direction. So some people want a Nordman, some people want a Fraser, some people want a Norway, because that's the traditional thing. But
yeah, very, very interesting indeed to get that insight. So thank you for that. Thinking about actually the farm business, the enterprise, I heard your good lady Helen talking about return of capital's really good. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean for the farm business?
Well, it's very important, of course. I mean, when you compare it to our dairy enterprise, where we spent hundreds of thousands of pounds investing in a new parlour and in the cattle, etc., and you've got a fairly volatile market where you're very much a price taker, whereas here we're selling a product where we're the price maker and we can decide what we're going to sell the product for. And that was one of the reasons for moving into this crop in the first place. But Helen was referring to the fact that where we live is basically some relatively old buildings that were once used as a dairy site, and so there hasn't been a huge investment in the site from that point of view, and we've been able to adapt that, and it obviously has a certain ambience about it as well, and so people enjoy that. But from a business point of view, the return on capital here is good.
Yeah. And Matt, thinking about the similarity to other crops that you're having to put into the ground and wait until you can gain that harvestable yield, so to speak. I'm thinking about your top fruits and cider. This is quite similar, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a long-term crop. We don't put this in the ground and sow it and harvest it in the same year. We nurture it. We have a lot of time and attention that goes into it, from the planting, the husbandry, the pruning, the shaping, lifting, marketing. So it's certainly a long-term approach. I think historically there was a view that you could just chuck Christmas trees into the corner of a field somewhere and they'd grow and come back 5 years later and quids in. Unfortunately, that's not the case. You really need to think about where you are, site selection, soil preparation, and giving them all the attention they need in those formative years to get the shape and the structure of the tree correct. You can look around here, Tony, there's quite a uniform crop, and what we call the architecture of the tree, the distance between the branching, the number of branches per whirl, that's all really important to get a high-end, high-value premium tree where you can achieve the 55, 60 pound a tree. If you're not putting that time and attention into it, then really you're not going to have as much success.
Yeah. That role of the horticultural agronomist working in tandem with the grower to nurture that crop through the establishment, through to getting a harvestable yield, it's really critical in those early years, aren't they?
100%. Yep, like we just noticed here, we've got some aphid on this particular tree. If we're not out scouting and finding it and being aware of the issue, and then relaying to the grower why those issues are a problem to us and what the result will be if we don't intervene, then we're not going to get the outcome desired. But just looking at where we are right now, we've noticed aphid here, but I'm seeing dozens of wasps flying around these trees. You can just see them coming in and out of these lower branches. So our natural predators are here all the time doing the right thing, and that's a big part of it as well. We can't just come in here and spray broad spectrum insecticides to try and mop everything up all the time. We've really got to work with nature. We've got that 5 to 7 year period where we can develop and grow the beneficial insect population to do a lot of this work for us.
Yeah. Moving forward and looking ahead, Lester, without prying too much, what are your thoughts about what the next steps are and where you are as a family thinking, well, where do we go next?
Well, the next step is succession, I guess, and taking more of a back seat. We've taken on a manager in the last 2 to 3 years and started that process. We also sat down with our children 3 years ago and said, this is what we own, this is what we owe, this is what we do. What do you want out of it going forward? So I think planning is very important looking forward. We're trying to move towards a retirement state. Farmers never really retire, do they? I think we're trying to move to a situation where we can control what we do a little bit more rather than be quite so driven as we were perhaps in our earlier years. So that's where we're going. But we do a lot of planning. We have a regular meeting every week with my son, who's a vet, manager, Robert. But we also meet on a quarterly basis with a consultant, and so budgeting and planning is a very important part of our business.
For the grower, the farmer looking to maybe diversify, find another enterprise, what would be your advice? What would be your top tips to those considering, for example, in this case, growing Christmas trees as part of their farm business? Matt, let's ask you first, and we'll come to you, Lester, for those finishing remarks.
As somebody who visits farms on a regular basis, that could be a complete mix of enterprises. One thing that I see as a common thread is businesses that engage with the general public in perhaps an agritourism sense. So whether it's growing grapes for wine and having a wine cellar, growing pick your own fruit and veg and having them come and collect that from the farm, where you're integrating with the general public and bringing them onto the farm, that generates interest and it generates opportunity. The consumer is wanting more and more traceability of where their food and their products come from. So that can only be achieved when they're having those face-to-face meetings and interactions with the farmer. So my advice would be, look at the enterprises you have, look at if you have an opportunity to develop an agritourism aspect to it, bring the consumer in and help that make your business profitable.
And Lester, what would be your top tips? Something that people can take away to consider listening to this podcast at this time of year?
Well, firstly, do your research and your planning. Make sure you've got a market out there. But secondly, I'd always say it's all about quality and it's about paying attention to detail. Don't do it scruffily. Your customer is very, very ready to walk away if you don't do the job properly. But quality is everything.
Thank you, Lester and Matt, for such an interesting visit and chat here at Cotley Farm in East Devon. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you would like us to ask the experts, email info@agrii.co.uk. See you next time.